and that's when the missile hit. I had been thrown right across a steel compartment. The heat started getting bad straight away. I remember thinking, I'm going to be baking alive in here.
G'day, and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Last week we spoke with Roger Haley, a Vietnam War veteran who served in the late 1960s. Now we speak with Nick Martin, a Falklands War veteran, about his PTSD story. Nick joined the British Navy in 1977, and when the Falkland Islands were invaded on April 1st, 1982, he was soon deployed there. While serving, his ship was sunk by missiles and he suffered extreme physical injuries. However, it was the mental injuries that Nick would experience for the next 4 decades, his PTSD, that affected him the most. Hello Nick, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Nick?
I'm a 65-year-old Brit living in Plymouth, which is a naval city. I joined the Navy when I was 21, and I was involved with the Falklands War in 1982. The ship that I was on was sunk, and I suffered some injuries, including a traumatic brain injury.
For those that don't know, Nick, how did the Falklands War come to be?
For me, it's a strange one. Argentina has always, 60 years, has claimed that the Falkland Islands, which is only 600 miles from their mainland, they've claimed them to be Argentinian. They've always been settled by British people, British territory. And so I think Argentina at the time were going through a really bad time politically. There was a lot of upheaval in the country. And it was perhaps a way to get people back on side to take back what they perceived to have been stolen by the UK. So they invaded the islands on the 1st of April 1982. I guess, considering it's 8,000 miles away, they thought that we'd just go, oh, well, we'll just leave it now then. But of course, the Brits aren't people that tend to do that if they've been invaded. We tend to want to stick up for ourselves and strike back. So that's what we did. We sent a task force 8,000 miles in the middle of the southern winter to retrieve the islands for the British people that lived there.
Was that around the time when you joined the army? Did you join the army because of the Falklands War, or did you join a little bit before that?
No, I joined in 1977,
okay.
So 5 years before that. I joined the Navy. I wouldn't have joined the Army. I can't wear brown. It's an awful colour on me. So, I joined the Navy. And to be honest, I didn't really know anything about the armed forces. I was working in an office and was just at 20 years old thinking, this can't be it. This can't be everything I'm doing. So decided on a life at sea. And so when the Falklands blew up, I was in Plymouth, happily married, got a couple of young children, and it was almost like a 9-to-5 job, going down into the dockyard each day and working on a ship there and then going home in the evening. So it was a little bit of a shock, because what we tend to do is 18 months on a ship and then 18 months off a ship, and we rotate like that. So I wasn't far into a shoreside rotation, so certainly wasn't expecting adventure of that sort.
When did you come to be deployed to the Falklands?
The Falklands began Argentina invaded on the 1st of April. On the evening of the 3rd of April, I was heading down to Portsmouth to fly out to Ascension Island, which is a tiny, tiny speck, but with a very important airfield, which is about halfway between the UK and the Falklands. So it's going to be a staging post, I guess, for logistics and supply. So quite early on.
Do you remember when you first got there, your first day there?
First day on the island was a real eye-opener. We'd been told that, because there was a very, very small team of us. In fact, there were only 2 supply lads, myself and a young lad called Jimmy Jewell. And we were told, you might get a few packages come through, hang on to them, and then when the ships come past, we'll just send those packages out to the ships. Well, the aircraft that Jimmy and I were on also included something like 4.5 tons of stores. And we had no equipment. We were just told right, if you sort it out. And then on a daily basis, we had tons and tons of equipment, everything from aircraft gearboxes down to ammunition and medical supplies came through us as well. So it was we were doing 18 hours off and 6 hours of sleep, and that was it for the first 3 weeks. So it was a bit of a shock.
How long were you deployed there for?
Well, I stayed on Ascension until the second week of May. And then on the second week of May, the Royal Air Force had kind of taken over from us. So Jimmy and I were a little bit redundant. And I had seen lads go past on their ships who weren't comfortable, going to war. By then, of course, some of the British ships had been hit and sunk. So it was a bit of a sort of a wake-up call for everyone. But I wanted to do something. So, but my fleet chief, who was in charge of us, said there's an opportunity to go down south with one of the ships and help with their stores on board. So that's what I did. Crossed it down by speedy ships and helicopters, transfers, all the way down to a ship called the Atlantic Conveyor. And I joined her on my birthday, the 23rd of May. And 2 days later, we were hit by Exocet missiles, which just blew the ship apart, really. Started incredible fires on board. So that was a real welcome to the war moment for me.
Yeah. Is that moment there that when it got hit by the missiles, was that really something that affected you quite a bit?
It's affected. There's no doubt. I mean, it's 40 years ago now, and it has almost ruled my whole life. The PTSD that I finally got diagnosed about 6 or 7 years ago has ruled everything I did. When I came back, I really suffered with a thing called survivor's guilt, and that controlled my mind without me sort of knowing about it, really. I decided that anything that was good, anything that was becoming successful in my life, I needed to sabotage it. And my thought process was all those lads, be they British, Islanders or Argentinians, that they never came back at all. They never had a chance to have happy lives. They never had a chance to enjoy getting married and having children and birthdays and Christmases. So I began sabotaging anything and everything that was good, including my marriage, my relationship with my children and my family. In fact, it was only about 4 years ago I put in for my first ever promotion at work anywhere. I've done very lowly paid part-time work for the last 35 years because I haven't wanted to have to confront me being successful in something. But it was about 5 years ago, I think, I got involved with a charity here called Help for Heroes. It was almost like a light bulb moment where I went, I shouldn't be wallowing in grief and guilt. I should be going out there and doing the best that I can in these lads' memories instead of repressing everything. So I started getting involved with things and doing things and stepping out of a comfort zone, which I'd lived in for 35 years, really. Well, I say comfort zone. It wasn't a very nice comfort zone, but it was the one that suited me at the time. So, I found singing, art and sport, and they've brought me back from the brink. There's absolutely no doubt about it, particularly the sport. But I've started being sociable after 40 years. I've started accepting invitations to do things and go to places. And, instead of just sitting back and going, letting life... I used to say I've just drifted through life. I've had no plans. There's been no... everything's been arbitrary, and I've allowed things to happen. And it is difficult to change, but I'm getting there. There's no doubt about it. I'm getting there.
Nick, if you're comfortable with sharing with me, do you remember much of the day that the missiles hit the boat?
I remember some things. I was in bed, funnily enough. I'd been woken by an air raid warning red, which means that aircraft are incoming and imminent. But when I landed on the ship, I was put to work straight away. We weren't far away from the island, so we had to be ready for people to say, we need field hospitals, we need field kitchens, we need accommodation and more ammunition and fuel, etc. And the ship that I was on was a huge container ship that was literally crammed with stores and supplies. But I'd spent the best part, I guess, of about 36 hours trying to sort things out, and then went to bed, and that's when the missile hit. And I think that I had been thrown right across a steel compartment that probably measured 16 feet square, perhaps 8 feet tall. I'd been thrown out of bed. Everything except my skiddies was just disappeared. So I know I'd gone to bed with overalls and socks on. They were gone. Everything was absolutely pitch black. All electric supply to the compartment was down. The heat started getting bad straight away. I remember thinking, a baked potato. I'm going to be baking alive in here if I don't get out. I'd obviously been badly concussed. I wasn't 100% sure of what was going on. But eventually I found the door. A door on a warship has got huge, great lever-type clips that you open and close it because it's gas and watertight. I couldn't get the clips open at all. I'd dislocated my shoulder. I had a skull fracture, which was obviously, it meant my head felt as though, it was being hit by a sledgehammer every 10 seconds. I'd had other injuries as well, but I just couldn't get the door open. My feet were getting hotter and hotter on the deck, and I was aware that, I think I knew what had happened, that we'd been hit by something, but I didn't know how bad it was. Eventually, I went and got a fire extinguisher, which I knew was in the compartment, and I used it to bang the clips to try and get them open. But to be honest, I was absolutely distraught because they didn't seem to be moving at all. After about 5 minutes, I heard a voice outside shouting, open the door, open the door. And I remember shouting back as best I could because I'd lost teeth and broken and dislocated my jaw, so talking wasn't easy. But I remember shouting back something like, I can't. And I heard the voice just say, hang on. And it was a guy called Davy Hawkins. And Davy went away and got perhaps like a piece of scaffold pole, and he used that to help me pry open the clip. And he saved my life. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I would never have been able to get out of there without Davy's help. When he opened the compartment, the heat rushed in. Now, Davy had been breathing that in for 5 minutes, trying to help me. The toxic smoke and just the toxic red-hot air rushed into my lungs. It burnt the inside of my lungs and down through my throat as well. It was that hot. And Davy had been breathing this stuff in, for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
He helped me get to the upper deck because the concussion and the fact that, I didn't really know the ship very well. I didn't know where to go, couldn't see any light outside. So Davy helped me onto the upper deck, put me into a survival suit, like a bright orange rubber suit, and gently hoofed me over the side into the water. Without his help, I wouldn't have survived. There's no doubt about it. I would have baked alive. The sad thing is that Davy didn't make it home. I think he went back to look for other survivors, and he was never seen again. So, I owe him everything, really. So every day I say thank you, Davy. Whatever happens today, good or bad, it's because you got me out of that spot. So, yeah, so not an easy day.
How long were you in the Falklands after that? Did you come home pretty quickly after that?
I didn't actually. We tried to get our wounded home via Montevideo as quickly as we could, but because of the brain beginning to swell, what we were doing was going on hospital ships to Montevideo, and then they were flying everybody home. But because the doctor on one of the hospital ships said, we don't think this guy ought to fly, we don't know what's going to happen with pressure, etc. So I spent a little while, perhaps about 8 or 9 days, being shunted between hospital ships and the field hospital that was in an old meat processing factory on the Falklands. So I spent a little bit of time there, which I kind of, because I knew that my injuries weren't life-threatening, although to a certain degree life-changing, but I didn't know that at the time, I was fairly happy to do that. I eventually got home, to the UK at the end of June. So it was a good month, I guess, altogether, fapping about. Although I haven't seen my service document, I'm guessing at the time there. It might have been 2 weeks for all I know.
Okay.
I'd completely switched off from times and dates, etc., etc. So, yeah. And I think coming home and perhaps not being part, they had big victory parades and the ships were welcomed home by hundreds of thousands of people, but of course I wasn't part of that. So I think that was the start of things going downhill for me mentally. My relationship with my wife broke down pretty soon after that as well. So it was all about, this is what I deserve, actually. I'm not going to fight for her. I'm not going to fight for the children or the house or anything. It's kind of what I deserve for coming back, which is a terrible way of looking at it, but, it is what it is.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Nick Martin, a Falklands War veteran with a PTSD journey. And that did that feeling take hold pretty much as soon as you came back?
I think it did. As soon as I arrived back and realised that things weren't good at home and that the reception at home wasn't the reception that I kind of wanted, I think that's when I started becoming quite depressed. As you would do, without anything else, when a marriage breaks down, it's awful. And I did estrange myself from the children, not purposely at first. That was just the way that the courts worked over here. But I did not do a great deal to help either keep my relationship. And in fact, my daughter lives in Queensland now, and in 2018 I came across with Team UK to compete in the Invictus Games in Sydney, and that made an absolute world of difference to my relationship with her and my grandchildren, who are little Aussies. So it wasn't the end of everything, but I have to say that my daughter instigated us, getting back into a relationship, which I'm still not 100% sure of. I haven't rung them for a couple of months, and that's awful for a granddad, I know, but and it's no excuse. I'll say I have been busy with 101 things here, but every now and then that mental, we call it a black dog, will descend and just take over things again, and I have to realign myself and ground myself and go, right, you know what you're doing, let's stop it, and perhaps I'll ring and things get back on track. So,
did society understand PTSD back after the Falklands in the 1980s?
I think, to be honest, the Falklands was a sort of a trigger into, certainly in the UK, people looking at people that had gone into some sort of traumatic situation and it having them a profound effect on them. Before that, of course, and I love history and I love military history now, and reading how people were treated for shell shock and shot for cowardice during the First and Second World Wars, I've realised now that's deplorable, and we are beginning to learn more and more and more. But of course, I didn't get any help until. Actually, I've not really had any therapy at all. Everything I've managed to do has either been just trying to sort of sort things out in my own brain, but also being involved with other Falklands veterans. For a long, long time, I had nothing to do with any, I wasn't a member of a legion or anything like that, and I just shut myself off. And that's probably the worst thing I could have done. Being involved with veterans again is just like, it's like one big warm hug. Nobody judges you. Nobody has preconceived ideas of what you might be like or why. They just accept you for who you are and the fact that you've been through something that maybe they've been through something very similar. So the support that you get from other veterans and organisations over here is getting much, much better. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's still something that there are some preconceptions about military veterans with PTSD. People think that they're going to be abusive and violent and maybe turn to drink and drugs. And there's a lot of home abuse and they can't manage with the world. But there's an awful lot that for them, their triggers are different. I used to say that I just switched off from the whole world. I let it do everything around me, and I disengaged from everything, and I didn't want to be involved with anything at all. If I could have just, and there are some times when I go, I don't know how you got up every day because there was nothing there. There were no goals, there were no aspirations, and it does hit different veterans and different people. We mustn't forget that absolutely anybody can have PTSD. You don't have to be in the military at all. And different people deal with it in different ways. I know people that have been through 10 times worse than me, and they've been absolutely fine. So it is all in your own mind, how you conceive what's happened and how you compartmentalise it and how you then deal with it. And it can be quite difficult for some people. It's getting better for me anyway. But as I say, being involved with veterans and being around other veterans has been the best thing for me by far.
Did you ever find it hard to talk about the experiences you'd had while in the Falklands?
For a while, I think. I didn't say anything to my father. I don't think he ever knew. And I used to try and rationalise that by saying, he went to war in the Far East for 3 years. He joined the Royal Navy in 1942, and he flew in aircraft until the end of the war. 3 years later, he ditched in the sea on numerous occasions. He was shot at and fired at Japanese troops, etc. How could I talk to him about something that happened to me over a sort of really only a 3 or 4 week period, if that? How can I talk to him about it? So I didn't really tell anybody. My family still don't know. My daughter I've opened up a little bit to, but my brothers and sisters, they're aware that I'm a Falklands veteran. Certainly those that are on Facebook are. But I've never really told them what happened, and I haven't. But it's only, again, since being involved with veterans again and with Help for Heroes and the Royal British Legion, and me wanting to put a message out there that if you're struggling, you need to ask for help. Trying to do it on your own is not impossible, but it is so much harder. And that if you can recognise that you've got a problem, go and see somebody. Even if the first port of call is your local doctor, go and say to them, I'm struggling, I'm not coping, because without that, it can be very, very difficult. And there's no progression for you. You can recover a little bit, and then you'll take 10 steps back. So it's 2 steps forward, 10 steps back quite often, because you don't really know what you're doing. And even my brain is quite complex. It's just recognising, I'm not coping with this for whatever reason. Go and talk to somebody. And the best people that I've spoken to have been other veterans who have said, try this, do this. And that's how I got into art and back into sport and into singing in a choir. And being around those veterans has just been a real change, a positive step for me.
When did you get officially diagnosed with PTSD?
As I say, it was a short time ago. I just never realised that, what happened to me back down in 1982 had such a profound effect. And I just thought I was just a miserable old man, I stopped enjoying myself. I stopped socialising with people. I would get invited to parties but never go. Or on those rare occasions when I did, I might show my face, stay for 10 minutes and then make an excuse. And the excuses were always lies. They were always like, no, I've got the children this weekend, or, I've got to go because, I've got to see the doctor in the morning, and it was just ridiculous. So I didn't get a diagnosis until about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
And that led me, because without that diagnosis, I wouldn't have been involved with Help for Heroes. And that has opened up doors for all sorts of help. Excuse me. Whether that is physical help, mental help. As I say, just being around other veterans in the recovery centres and being part of social media groups is important for me. It's almost like being back in the Navy. People's senses of humour don't change, and we have got a wicked black sense of humour in the forces, I think, and it's something that I actually enjoy. Sarcasm is just, I know they say it's the lowest form of wit. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's kept me buzzing all the time. We went to the rugby the other day, the annual Army and Navy match, and I went with a load of soldiers, and we just ripped each other to shreds all day. But it's so light-hearted, and nobody takes offence, and we call them pongos, as we say, wherever the army goes, the pong goes too. But they take it quite well, and they'll sling things back at me about, oh, you blooming sailors can't march and what have you. And it's just a fantastic atmosphere to be in. There's always someone, if you start losing it. I remember having a sort of a mini breakdown as we were waiting to get off the ferry. We were caught in a storm, and because we were not at sea. We were in the river estuary, a couple of 100 yards away from the Opera House. But I just felt really bad. And a guy that I'd never spoken to from the Danish team just came over and put his arm around me and sort of said, you'll be fine, you'll be okay. And I don't think that happens in civilian life. Certainly I've not seen it. But amongst forces veterans and forces members, that bond, regardless of what country you served for or what branch of the services, that bond is pretty unbreakable, I think, and it's so important.
When you did get that diagnosis, did it offer any closure for you on why you were maybe acting the way you were, or did that kind of give you any explanation at all?
Well, it gave me something to focus on. I could finally use the internet and look up PTSD and see what some of the sort of causes are, although they are infinite, of course. But it also gave me access to just little things that I could do to help myself, little ways to ground myself where I felt bad, and little things that I could do to just ease what was happening during a particularly bad moment. And so without that, I wouldn't have bothered looking it up on the internet. But also, through the service charities, I was assessed by a medic, and she said, yeah, it's definitely PTSD, it's definitely attributable to the Falklands and my service in Northern Ireland. Therefore, you're entitled to a service pension, a war pension. So without that, some of the other service charities don't accept you. So you need that diagnosis to be made official, and then other doors open. And those other doors have been opening for the last 5 or 6 years, and they've been fantastic. They really have. As I say, I managed to get to Sydney to cycle around the Botanical Garden. I can say I'm an international athlete, and it's. And I'm going again. The next Invictus Games is in Dusseldorf. One thing it has taught me is that if I look after my body, then that helps my mind as well. So sport and physical fitness has been quite a driver for me. I'm not wonderfully fit. Certainly since COVID's hit, it's knocked me back a bit. But I know what to do and I know how to do it now, and that's quite important for me.
So it sounds like, Nick, that there is quite a lot of support out there for Falkland vets with PTSD.
I think there is, yeah. The only thing is that sometimes you have to go and find it.
Yeah, okay.
I see a lot of criticism of some of the service charities on social media saying, my friend's never had any help from any of these charities. And you say, well, has he approached them? And they say, well, no. Well, how do they know he's there? How do they know he's got a problem? So you have to sort of approach them, and but the first step is to perhaps get a diagnosis, or even just go and see your GP. And that diagnosis, when it follows, can open all the other doors for you. So that is an important thing to do. Acknowledge that there's a problem, and then talk to somebody about getting help. And there are a lot of service charities over here now, some of them much better than others. But certainly Help for Heroes has been monumental for me. It opened up so many doors. As I say, the singing, the sport, everything else has been wonderful since then.
How do you manage your PTSD now? You mentioned you have all those good outlets. When you're out in daily life, how do you manage it? Do you have any ways of, any strategies?
I've always been quite calm and collected, and it's I work with young children in a secondary school over here, so sort of 11 to 18-year-olds. Some of them can be quite difficult, and it sounds awful, but I just sit back and go, you know what, you're venting at me because you don't know how to use your vocabulary, you don't know how to express. And the fact that I now feel as though I'm doing a worthwhile job helps me immeasurably. It doesn't matter how tired I am when I get home. I think, no, you talk that kid out of walking out of school today, or you explain to them how they can help themselves. Most of the students I work with are autistic, and they don't really understand how the world works around them because they are different. There's no doubt about it. They've got a different viewpoint. And it's just, I think now that I've become a member of the Invictus family, I've done things over the last 6 years that I hadn't done for the 35 years before that. And actually achieving things is so important. I'm good at writing lists. of things to do. I'm not always very good at actually carrying them out, but I find that talking to people is obviously brilliant. Letting people know that I feel worthwhile is really, really important. And the job that I do now, as I say, I don't know how many positive relationships I've had with young people that have helped them through life. In fact, I was at the rugby in Twickenham in London on Saturday, and I heard a voice just go, "Oi, Mr. Martin." And when I turned round, it was a young lady called Kiri. She used to be in my tutor group 15 years ago, and she joined the Navy herself when she left school. And when I spoke to her about it, and I said, "Well, you never gave me any ideas of wanting to join the military," and she said, "No, but your stories, I had to join up just to see if they were true." So, and I know she had a good time in there. I know she enjoyed it, and it's given her a stepping stone for the rest of her life. So if I think back, I'm doing something worthwhile. I'm doing something that's important for these young kids to help them on their way. That's a fantastic thought, if you like. I've been really lucky with the artwork that I've done, that I've won some awards with it. So it's that idea that actually I am quite good at something, and I'm beginning to learn how to push that a little bit and to accept when people say nice things about me and take compliment. I could never do that before. So yeah, I think just enjoying things at the moment. The simplest thing for me, as I say, I've got laundry on the line. If that's dry by tonight, that will make me happy as Larry. Just bringing laundry off the line and getting things done around the house that I bought. So that's where I stay grounded, I think.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. My guest today is Nick Martin, a Falklands War veteran with a PTSD journey. Do you think that PTSD is something that it's not something that's cured, but you just manage it? Has that been your experience?
I think so, and I think the more you learn about what's good for you when things turn dark and how you manage them, you know how to manage them the next time. I think it gets better. I don't suppose for a minute, without some really intense therapy, that you'll ever be able to eradicate it. But you do, like anything else, you'll manage it, and you'll recognise when there are guys out there that don't like loud bangs, or that have flashbacks to moments when they were injured, or they don't like a particular smell. And I'll be honest, after time in the field hospital, if it's bacon cooking, I have to have it done in the oven because I can't stand the smell of cooking meat on a grill or something. It just takes me straight back. So I don't do it. There are a lot of the students that I talk to that say, I hate my life, and I say, well, change it. You've got the power to change either the way you look at things or the way that things do it. If you keep doing the same thing every day, there'll be no different outcome for you. If you don't want to get into trouble, stop shouting out in class. If you don't want to get into trouble for not doing your homework, find a time to sit down and do your homework. And that's how it works. And it's the same for me. If I want to progress, then I've got to do things that make me feel good about myself. Can't expect anyone else to do it, and don't expect anyone else to do it. But, just finding those little things, they're like little victories each day, whether it's watching birds at the feeders in the garden or getting the laundry dry or, finishing a book. Those tiny little things can be so important to keep you grounded.
What would your advice be then to younger veterans that may be really struggling at the moment but just haven't gotten help yet? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I think that first step has got to be, if you know you're struggling, talk to somebody, and it doesn't matter if it's a family member, a friend. If you think it's at the point where you visiting your GP is the first step, then please just do it. There are an awful lot of veterans who think because they've been in the military that they have to be tough for the rest of their lives and they have to put up with whatever comes, and that's not a truth at all. There's a lot of people who are perhaps too worried about what their friends might think. I'm quite open with students at school and with other people to say, yeah, I've got a traumatic brain injury. I can't sequence. My memory is absolutely awful. And I think it's important just to face up to the fact that, something's not 100% right. And think about what it is that you want, what it is that you want to achieve or your life to be like, and then follow that route go and find out how you can change things, how you can get help. But in the absolute first instance, talking to people. Because if you just sit and talk to yourself, nothing's going to happen at all. You won't change anything, I don't think. So that's certainly my first piece of advice. Talk to people. Well, and be honest and candid and open. I think that's vital.
Well, thank you for taking the time today, Nick, to talk to me about all this and for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. No worries at all. And I hope everybody there on the other side of the world can, if they've heard what I've said and they are struggling, especially if they're service personnel, because they're brothers and sisters to all of us. If it changes one little thing for the better, then that's been time very well spent, hasn't it?
My guest today was Nick Martin, a Falklands War veteran with a PTSD journey. Tune in next week where we speak with an Iraq War veteran about their PTSD story. And if you like this content, check out the Wellbeing podcast for more. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.